Good morning, everybody. Welcome to LifeHouse. My name is Ryan. Good to see you guys here in the room. Good to see you online as well. Hey, listen, we gather and we sing because we believe that love has come down to us. And no matter who we are, no matter if we're male, female, sinner, saint, we have an opportunity to receive love from God. And we're going to start with a song about that. And so if you're here in the room, I want to invite you to stand and let's sing together this morning. Come on, put your hands together. I will sing forever of your love come down. With my hands to heaven, shout your praises loud. I was lost in darkness when you pulled me out. I will sing forever of your love come down. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Was blind, I could not see. Chains of sin had shackled me. But God in heaven heard my plea, and Jesus, Jesus rescued me. Oh, Jesus, Jesus rescued me. I will sing forever of your love come down. With my hands to heaven, shout your praises loud. I was lost in when you pulled me out. I will sing forever of your love come down. Oh, now grace so sweet, it floods my soul, and hope eternal won't let go. My debt erased at Calvary, 'cause Jesus, Jesus rescued me. Oh, Jesus, Jesus rescued me. I will sing forever of your love come down. With my hands to heaven, shout your praises loud. I was lost in darkness when you pulled me out. I will sing forever of your love come down. Oh, 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 now there's a home beyond the sky, a song we'll sing for all of time. The grave is empty, I am free, 'cause Jesus, Jesus rescued me. Oh, Jesus, Jesus rescued me. And I will sing forever of your love come down. With my hands to heaven, shout your praises loud. I was lost in darkness when you pulled me out. I will sing forever of your love come down. I will sing forever of your love come down. My hands to heaven, shout your praises loud. I was lost in darkness when you pulled me out. I will sing forever of your love come down. I will sing forever of your love come down. I will sing forever of your love come down. Oh, 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 yeah. Thank you guys for singing with us. You go ahead and take your seats. Once again, my name's Ryan. So good to see you guys here. Welcome to LifeHouse today, in the room and online. Glad that you guys are here. I got to tell you, I had the chance to go to Atlanta a couple weeks ago for a church conference. Got together with other people who do what we do in the church world. It was a great trip, but we were flying home, flying from Atlanta to Fort Wayne. And we were at our gate, getting ready to board the plane. And they came over the loudspeaker and said, hey, we need 3 people to not get on this flight and get on another flight tomorrow morning. We'll pay for your hotel. And we'll give you $500. And when they said it, it was like I couldn't process what was happening. So I didn't know this was a thing. I had no idea what was going on. And then another minute or two later, they came over and said the same announcement, except they upped it to $600. And then I started to realize, and in fact, a coworker I was with was like, this is a thing. and just wait. Nobody's going to take the money, and they'll keep upping it. And I was like, they'll pay you to like not get on an airplane? Like, sign me up for that. And so sure enough, a couple minutes later, it was up to $700. And at that point, I was texting my wife. I was like, should I do this? She was like, you'd be an idiot if you don't do this. And so it went up to $800, $900. I was like, I'm taking this. And so I went up to the desk. I was the last person out of the three. And so they said, yeah, so just when everybody else boards, you stay back. And as long as we don't have a seat open up, we're going to give you $900 cash. Like, yeah, let's go. And so everybody boarded. I waited back, and they said, okay, you're on the plane now. Yeah. And I didn't get my money. How sad is that? I'm still sad. I was like, my wife had all these plans, and now it's all to crap now. But yeah, that's my sad story. I did not get the money. I've got a little more. There's some good that came out of that, and I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But here's why I tell you that story, because if you're new around here, we don't want you to sit here and feel like you don't know what's going on. That's how I felt when they were talking about the $500 originally. I was like, what is happening? We don't want you to feel like, what is happening here? We want to tell you what's going on today. And so for all of us, whether you're new or not, we have what we hope is a really helpful service today. The band's got a few more songs. We're really excited. Meg Braun is here. She's going to bring today's message. And we get to experience something in just a couple minutes that's really cool. It's called a baptism. If you're new to church, new to faith, a baptism is just a way for somebody to go public with their faith in Jesus, and they're going to get dunked in a tank of water over here. And we have Paula here today. There's Paula. Paula, can you wave? Our friend Paula is going to get baptized today. And so we get to hear Paula's story. We're going to show you a video, a short video of her story, and then she's going to get baptized, and then we get to celebrate along with her because we love celebrating baptisms and steps in people's faith. And then we're going to have you out of here in about an hour or so. But listen, I know we've got a lot of people in a lot of different places in life. So whether you're here and life's good or maybe life's hard right now or somewhere in between, we believe that Jesus can be the light in our darkness, the light in our world. And we want to sing that. We want to invite you into experience that love today. So if you're in the room here, I want to invite you to stand. Let's sing this next song together.
Surrounding me, let it break. If I hear you speak, I don't need an explanation. If you tell me move, I don't need a destination. If what's promised I never see, I'm still walking with you. You're still walking with me. You will redeem all the time spent wandering. You've been the fire and the cloud I'm following. You made a way out of bondage and darkness just yesterday. So today, if I hear you speak, I don't need an explanation. If you tell me move, I don't need a destination. What's been promised, I will believe. I'm still walking with you. You're still walking with me. Si una cosa sé, Dios es mi libertador. Si una cosa sé, Dios me puede rescatar. Una cosa sé, Dios es mi libertador. Si una cosa sé, Dios me puede rescatar. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. And if I know one thing, our God is gonna see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. And if I know one thing, our God is gonna see us. He'll see us through. Yes, He will. Yes, He will. Never alone in the battle.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in the desert.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in the fire.
He'll see us
Oh,
through.
yes, He will.
See us
Oh, yes, He will.
through.
You're never alone in the water.
He'll see us through.
You're never alone in depression.
He'll see us through.
Never alone in addiction.
He'll see us
Oh, yes, He will. Oh, yes, He will. And in all our anxiety, I know. And in our darkest thoughts, I know Jesus will. And in every circumstance, I know. Oh, yes, He will. Oh, and if I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. And if I know one thing, our God is gonna see us through. If I know one thing, our God is a deliverer. And if I know one thing, our God is gonna see us. He'll see us through. Yes, He will. Yes, He will.
Yeah. Thanks, Joanne, for leading us in that song. Thank you guys for singing with us. You go ahead and take your seats. And as you do, as I said earlier, we get to witness and celebrate with Paula as she gets baptized. So check out her story.
Hello, my name is Paula. I didn't grow up in a faith-based home at all. My mom talked about God, and when I was in middle school, I moved in with my father, and we did not go to church there either. I occasionally went to church on Christmas and Easter. So I didn't have a lot of exposure to faith and God when I was growing up. I also didn't have a lot of adult influences or support. So when I was in middle school and high school, I struggled mentally. And I made very poor decisions related to, alcohol and sex as a teenager, and it led to a lot of broken relationships. And I feel like if I would have had a good, strong faith-based, I would have felt better. I felt unworthy of anything good, and I didn't deserve anything good. As I became an adult and transitioned, I went around to a variety of different churches, and I never found a church that felt like home or that I belonged there. About 8 years ago, Ann Dunn invited me to church here at LifeHouse. I felt very welcome and very loved. Started coming on Sundays and still felt called to do more. It felt like my home, and I really wanted to do more. So Ann asked me to sub in our upstreet environment. I began subbing the upstreet environment, and about 6 months later, I became a small group leader of second grade girls. I've had the incredible honor of still being their small group leader as they are freshmen in high school. And it's been amazing growing with them through their faith, allowing me to be able to let them know that they are enough, they are loved, they are children of God has just been an incredible blessing to me because I didn't have that when I was their age. As I've grown more in the church and more in my faith, I have been part of a women's small group. And last year I was invited to do LDG. And these women have been amazing for me. They have taught me that it's okay to hit rock bottom because God's there to pick us back up. And I truly never felt so much love and support and encouragement from such a wonderful, amazing group of women. I would like to first start out by thanking Ann Dunn for inviting me to church and Ann and Jackie for leading our small group. I also want to thank Megan and Ellie for inviting me to be involved in the LDG group. It was an amazing experience. And I want to thank my small group girls for allowing me to continue to walk through their faith journey with them side by side. Lastly, I want to thank my children for always being supportive, and my husband Shane for his unconditional love and encouragement that he gives me every single day. My name is Paula Stabler, and I'm here today to declare that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior.
Paula, this is such a special day that you've been waiting for God's perfect timing to bring you to this very moment. And we've known each other for years, and we've been through lots of ups and downs together. And you have truly shown me what it is like to just walk in faith and to love others regardless of the circumstances and the difficulties and the challenges of relationships. You have taught me how to lead well. And you've done that for so many other people. It has been a joy for Jackie and I to have this group with you and to have you involved and to see you grow and to step one foot in front of the other. Even when you were scared to death, you have stepped out in boldness. And we are so excited and honored and blessed to be a part of this day, to share in you this new life with Jesus. So with this, with your declaration of faith, we baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Wow. There is so much we could unpack here. We could just spend the next hour unpacking just what happened right there in that story. It's so neat to see kind of full circle where Ann invited Paula to church, and now she gets the privilege of baptizing her. And just to hear in Paula's story all the different threads of this church, and to know that her faith has not been made her own in a vacuum. It's happened in the context of this this place, of other people. And listen, if you don't know Paula personally, but you show up around here, maybe you serve in some way, like you've been a part of her story. And we're so grateful for that. We get to be a part of something really special here. And I was kind of reminded of that back a couple weeks ago when I was in the Atlanta airport. I told you earlier. I didn't get my $900, which was bad. But what was really cool was I was going up to my gate in the Atlanta airport, and there, sitting there, I grew up in church. I grew up at a church not too far from here, and a really good church. And there was a couple who are now in their 80s who were sitting right there. I hadn't seen them in 25 years, but here was this couple from my church. And it's hard to put into words how special it was to see them, and we got to connect, and we got to catch up. And I didn't even really know them that well when I was a kid. I just knew that they were like a solid couple who was involved in our church and supported kids and students, but they were just a solid fixture in my childhood, and I thanked them for that. And it made me think of this place, because we have literally dozens, hundreds of kids and students that come in these walls every single week. And how many of those kids in 25, 30 years get to go to an airport and see one of us, somebody, if you call LifeHouse home, and maybe they don't know you or you don't know them real well, but they can say, oh, there's so-and-so, like I know they were a big part of LifeHouse. And maybe that kid's faith has come a long way, and you get to be a part of that foundation. Listen, we all can't sit in small groups like Paula does with those high school students. That's not our gifting, and that's okay. We still get to contribute and be a part of this place in our own ways. And when we talk about our students, there's a real practical way right now that you don't have to sit in a small group with them to help them out. So we have over 100 students, high school, middle school students this summer who are going to summer camp and are going on a missions trip. Our middle school students get to go to summer camp, and our high school students get to go on a missions trip. And we have a chance to come alongside them and just say, hey, we love you, we support you, we want to encourage you to do that. We have a chance to come alongside through our generosity. The cost to go to camp and to do this missions trip, you guys know that things cost money, right? It's close to $50,000. We as a church want to cover half of that. We would love to come alongside them, cover half the cost for the students to be able to have an experience this summer that maybe is going to change a life, maybe change an eternity for somebody. So we want to raise just under $24,000 to help send 100 middle school students, 100 high school students to camp and do a missions trip this summer. So I want to invite you to do that, to be generous in that way. Out in the lobby, there's a board with all the pictures of the kids that are going, and it's super easy to be a part of giving. There's a QR code that you just scan. You can give online. You can give here in person, online. Click the link in the chat box. But we get to be a part of what God's doing in their lives this summer. And maybe, just maybe, down the road, we get to see that fruit in a student's life because of the part that we played in their faith journey. And that's so cool. Well, thank you guys for being who you are, and we're going to keep going with the rest of our service now. I'm going to turn things over to Meg Braun for today's message.
Good morning, everybody. Like Ryan said, my name is Megan, and I am so excited to be spending the morning with you all. Usually I'm back in Upstreet with a lot of elementary kids, and I can't be more happy to do that, but I'm so glad to be here with y'all this morning. And so the ironic part about me being up on stage is that when I was about in 6th grade, I would do everything possible to be out and stay out of this room. I just did not want to sit in a service. I did not want to listen to my dad's dad speak, it was not on the agenda. And so what I would do is I would get these full-size donuts because that's what we had back in the day, and I would go find a stairwell and I would hide under it. And I would avoid any adult or any person who could tell me that I had to be in the big room. But the irony is, here we are, I'm 25 years old and up here talking to all of you, which is truly a joy. And so today we are continuing our series that we've been in the last couple weeks, What Our World Needs Now. And this series has been based around the question that we have been talking about each week, and it's this. It's what our world needs now is blank. And so many of us have so many answers that we could fill in the blank. We have our ideas, we have our thoughts, and here are just a few that I think, but more of what our world doesn't need. And so I think that our world doesn't need more of the same. I think there needs to be some spice thrown in, something different. And our world does not need more of the past. I don't need to bring my past into my future. I don't think we need more arguing, and I really don't think we need more promises. Promises that have the potential to be broken, forgotten, or just disregarded altogether. And the Apostle Paul, he would say that the world, it needs more of you, and it needs more of me, and it needs more of us. But let's be honest, you know yourself, we don't want the current version of us. And the Apostle Paul would say that we need a grown-up version of who we are. And we need people that are, what Paul would say, who put childish ways behind them, because we don't need to embrace those childish ways that we once had. And we need to refuse, or those who refuse to bite and provoke others, and those who win the respect of outsiders. And the last one, who are led by the Holy Spirit. And within this series, we're talking a lot about being led by the Holy Spirit and what that looks like. Because we all have to get to the point where we become more mature and we become to be led by the Spirit. And what this really means is being Christ-like. And the purpose of this series is we're asking what Christ-like actually is and what it looks, acts, and reacts like. And we've said that being Christ-like is to be more mature and complete in who we are. And so this is not a new to-do list. This is not something that we whipped up in the back and brought out as this fresh idea. This has been around for a long time, and it's simply this. It's the fruit of the Spirit. And the fruit of the Spirit is so cool because it is actually the outcome of our submission to God's Spirit within us. We don't just get to find this fruit out of nowhere. It doesn't just come easy to us. It's actually because of our posture and our submission to God's Spirit, so that then this can be produced within us. And so the first fruit that we talked about in week 1 was love. And love is the first fruit because everyone that comes after it is tied back to the idea of love. And this is simply because we follow a God who is love. And then last week we talked about joy and how when we embrace joy, it should be Jesus, others, and ourselves, and not others, or not ourselves, others, and Jesus. And it's a great perspective when it comes to joy. And then this week we get the privilege of talking about peace and what peace looks like. But before we jump in to what peace is, I think it's essential to actually look at what the opposite of peace is. Because if we're gonna get to where we feel fulfilled in an inner sense of peace, what's stopping us from getting there? And so a couple verses back, Paul actually lays out a list of what it looks like to be opposed to peace. And he says it's the acts of the flesh. And he says this because the acts of the flesh are what come natural to us. It's something that we don't have to work at to have in our lives. It's just the things that is natural to us as humans. It's natural for our world to embrace. And this isn't a popular phrase, but it's what sin has ultimately done to us. It's easy, but not always in the best way. And so Paul makes a list, and this is not the whole list, it's just a portion of it. But he says, the acts of the flesh are hatred and discord and jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy. And as it turns out, the acts of the flesh are actually opposed to what peace is. It's a deficiency in what we are called to live out in a sense of peace. And I think it's so interesting because so many times when we think of peace, we think if we just get rid of all of this stuff, all this negative things, if we just get rid of conflict and we leave out war and anger and envy, then we'll establish peace. But I think it is that, but the biblical idea actually tells us that it's the welcoming in of something greater. That peace is not just the absence, but it is the presence of something greater in our lives. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about today. And this idea of peace coming from something greater, it has been around for a very long time, thousands of years. In fact, the Israelites called it shalom. And as they referenced it as shalom, this is simply the Hebrew word for peace, but it encompasses this something greater that we're talking about. And it's used in a couple places in the Bible that help us get a framework for what shalom really is. And one example of that is when God told Moses to help build an altar from uncut stones. And he was not allowed to use stones with cracks in them, with defects in them, because this wouldn't be whole. And so when we see shalom, it actually means a sense of wholeness, a wholeness in our inner being. And another example is when Solomon, he built the temple of Jerusalem, and he considered it finished, he considered it done when all the gaps were filled in. There was no stone left out, it was put together, there was no cracks, there was no holes, and this represented completeness. And it's like when you clean your house and you start in your bedroom and then you go to the bathroom and then you get the kitchen done and then you end in the living room and you finally sit down on the couch, you take a deep breath because the house is clean until your kids come home or your husband walks in. But you have a sense of completeness and it feels like things are okay. And then the last one is when it comes to our relationships and the reconciliation of our relationships. That when we know as people, when our relationships are broken, we don't feel all right inside. We just feel a little off and that there's a tension. And so Joseph, he was sold by his brothers and his family, and there was a lot of chaos and a lot of messiness within their family. But then Joseph, he asked about his father. He said, "How's my father doing?" And his father was Jacob, and he was old and he was aging. And Joseph finds out that his father was in a state of well-being. And so another aspect of shalom is that we have a sense of well-being, because we all know that we are better off when our relationships are not broken. And so all of these things help us get a framework for what it means to have shalom and when it's given to us by Jesus. And so it's not only the absence of conflict or difficulties, but it is the presence of something greater. And so I just think that thinking about completeness and wholeness and well-being when it comes to this, that even if you don't know about the whole Jesus thing, or you're trying to figure out, or you're just kind of like, I don't know, I'm not sure, I think these things are desirable. There's something that we still can look after even if we're trying to figure the faith thing out. And the people of Israel, they were not good at maintaining this sense of shalom. It was not their strong suit, whether internally or externally. They just had a hard time getting it down. And they had a prophet, and the prophet's name was Isaiah. And Isaiah told them that there was a future king who was coming. And there was a king who would bring this unending shalom, something that they could only wish for. And this unending peace, this unending shalom, was framed as the Prince of Peace. And it was the King of Kings, and it was someone who was coming, and it was a king that was known as Jesus. And so Jesus was coming, and the king would deliver, the king would guard, and the king would guide all these people into a sense of his peace. And the world was clearly in need of it then, but I think the world is clearly in need of it now, because we're not so good at shalom either. So how do we, in our world and in our communities and in our circumstances, lean in to what the Prince of Peace has for us and to engage the peace that he's given us? And so what was true of ancient Israel 3,000 years ago is also what's true today. In fact, according to research by a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, and in his book, The Anxious Generation, he published a study talking about clinical cases of anxiety and how they have actually skyrocketed since 2010. And so I wanted to share just a few of those statistics this morning. And so we're looking at 3 different generations here. And in Gen X, which is like my parents' generation, there's an increase of 52% of cases of anxiety since 2010. And then in the millennial generation, there's an increase of 103% cases of anxiety. And then there's Gen Z, which is my generation. And so that's personal to me. And that's something that I've walked through and been with people as they've walked through. And it's an increase of 139%. These are not small numbers. And so anxiety is increasing at a rate that we can't even keep up with. And there was another study, and it talked about people experiencing anxiety depressive disorder. And this study showed that more than 83 million adults in America reported experiencing anxiety or depressive disorders. That's a number so big that I can't even wrap my mind around how many people that actually is. And it's kind of terrifying for me to think that these numbers are it's not only happening, but it's increasing. And I am at will to fall into that. And so as I think about these things, I think about how anxiety is just in our world. And then I think about what our world needs. And I think about how peace comes into the picture. And this peace, we don't just need a simple peace, but we need an inner peace, something that starts on the inside, and then once it's on the inside, it becomes external. And that peace then affects the people around us, in our circles, in our communities. And so what our world needs now is that sense of inner peace that then moves outward. And so the first century New Testament followers of Jesus, they were given specific instructions when it came to the chaos that they endured when they were under the rule of Roman leaders. Because back then, it was dangerous to be a Jesus follower. They were wondering when they would wake up, am I gonna be here tomorrow? Am I gonna make it through today? Because just being a Jesus follower was dangerous. And so with the anxiety that we are living in our culture today, and the fear and the anxiety that they had thousands of years ago, this is what Paul said to these first century Jesus followers. He says, do not be anxious about anything. And some of you are like, okay, this verse really makes me mad because how am I just not supposed to be anxious? How am I just not supposed to feel the way I feel on the inside? And I think that as the first century Jesus followers would put it, man, it's really easy to fall into a sense of anxiety. And it's even easier to fall into a sense of anti-shalom on top of that. And anti-shalom is the opposite of shalom. And so if peace is shalom, then the opposite of peace is that anxiety, but it's a greater sense of it. And so when we think about what this sense of anti-shalom means and what is at risk if we fall into it, I feel like we get divided as people and as our inner beings, and we start to feel divided for who we know we are and what we are living out as an individual. And I also think that our hearts have a potential to be fractured. And this can happen among a lot of ways that we know that our hearts get broken by people, by things, by beliefs, and what we are walking through in our circumstances. And then we also can be pulled apart. And we can be pulled apart externally, but I think it starts internally. And Paul is saying, don't let anything pull you apart. And why? Because when we have a divided heart and a divided mind and we become fractured, then we all become vulnerable and we become fragile. And not the healthy sense of vulnerability, but a sense of vulnerability and being fragile where you have the potential to be persuaded, manipulated, and controlled because things are a little shaky inside. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't like to be controlled, manipulated, and persuaded. That's not something that I am very fond of. And so Paul would say, don't let it. Don't be anxious. And so on the inside, we feel the division and the fracture and the being pulled apart, but then this becomes external. I mean, y'all have heard it that nothing divides like politics. And when nothing divides like politics, then this gets a little messy. And I'm not a super political person, and I will be very upfront about that. But growing up and seeing this in the communities and the relationships and the people around me, it's very evident that we are paving the way for division in our communities, in our families, with our friendships, and I hate to say it, but even our churches. That this is becoming so real for so many people. And I think that nothing divides like politics, but nothing divides like fear. And fear becomes the root of what is eating us alive inside that starts internally and then comes externally and affects us in ways that we don't even recognize. And we get to the place where fear is so real that we start to ask, well, who do I trust? Who do I actually place things in the hands of that can actually take care of it and help me lean away from this fear and so I can Be confident in something. And when we sit in this fear, we start to decide, well, am I gonna listen to this group of people? Or if I'm gonna be over here, or am I gonna stay somewhere in the middle and invite people to believe what I'm gonna believe? And what political values and beliefs, and where do I stand, and what do I do, and how do I decide? And even as I'm describing it, the turmoil that I'm going through in my mind is just exhausting. And Paul would say, don't look left, don't look right, look up. Because there's never been an election in our world that has solved the problem of who has sovereign control in our world. And that's because it's already been taken care of. And Jesus would say, I don't want your vote, nor do I want it, nor do I need it. But he says, I've given you something better. And so this internal peace that becomes external, and nothing divides like the fear that we have internally. And Paul would continue to say, he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So whatever is pulling your heart and your mind or your marriage or your family apart, whatever is robbing you of that sense of shalom, take it to the authority of peace. And that doesn't mean we just disregard it or we put it on the back burner. It means we give it to the person who cares more about it than we ever could. And we give it to the person who can actually do something about it. And so a couple years ago, in 2019, I was diagnosed with a blood clot in my left leg. And some of you know the story and some of you don't, so I will spare a lot of the details. But it was a hard time, and I had to go through a lot of surgeries, procedures to get through it. But I was on the back end of it. And on the back end, my doctor up in Fort Wayne, he was like, hey, you're good here, but you just need one more procedure. Like, you just got one more, and then we're capping it, and you're done. And I said, great, can we schedule? And he said, well, we can't do it. And I said, awesome. So who can do it? And I appreciated the honesty because I would rather go to someone who is confident in it. And he said, well, you need to go to a higher end hospital. So we recommend the Cleveland Clinic. And I said, great, MVPs of hospitals, going bougie, like, let's do it. And so we call Cleveland Clinic and we get with their receptionist and they're like, it's a 6-month wait until you can get on our schedule. And I'm like, that's not gonna work, because this wasn't extremely urgent, but it was timely and I needed to get it done quickly. And so we're like, okay, all hope is lost with Cleveland Clinic, let's look somewhere else. And a couple of days later, my dad comes to my mom and I and says, hey, I know somebody who's connected to somebody who knows a doctor at Cleveland Clinic, and we got on the schedule. And my first question was, Dad, how are you cool enough to know someone at Cleveland Clinic? I'm not connecting the dots here, but I guess anything is possible. So he had a connection, I got on the schedule, we packed up our van, we made it to Cleveland, and I had the procedure, and all went well. But I think sometimes we believe that we have to have a connection and then be connected to someone else to get us to a point where we can access the peace that God is willing to give us. And we feel like we have to know somebody who knows somebody to have access to the highest authority on peace. But I think, and I know that we already have access to it. And it's already been offered and it's already been made available to us. The invitation is there to have it in every situation. And Paul would say, when you do, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, it'll guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I mean, have y'all ever met someone who just like exemplifies what this is? Like they walk in a room and they have this glow about them and you're like, I don't know how they are so peaceful. I don't know how they are so calm, but they just are. And when I think about this, I think about funerals and I think about how it's said that it can be a celebration of life, but then it can also be just a funeral with devastation. And the difference is a celebration is hope of a life well lived. And the devastation comes from the lack of hope of the life that was lost. And when I think about this, I think about my Grammy, and she's my grandma, but she's my dad's mom, and she is just a crazy 80-year-old who is the best person ever, and I love her to death. But she lost her dad, and it was my great-grandfather, and we called him Poppy. And when she lost her dad, she was determined that it was gonna be a celebration of life. And so our whole family got together and we were getting ready for the service, and she circled us up and she said, okay guys, at the end of the service, we are going to get up in front of everybody and we're gonna dance to a really cheesy Christian song. And I said, No, I don't want to do that. That's embarrassing. And I was also a middle schooler, and my twin cousins were middle schoolers. And so I don't know if y'all know much about middle schoolers. We don't like to get up and dance in front of people. We were nervous and embarrassed and all of the things. But if we were sitting down, you would have bet that Grammy would have pulled you up, spun you around, and danced till her heart was content. And so we did. And we danced, and we sang, and we cried. But what I know about that celebration of life is that Grammy was confident of the life that was lost. And she was confident in the midst of her heartbreak, because it didn't make it easier. But in the midst of her heartbreak, she knew that her father was going to be with his father. And within that, she had a peace that transcends understanding. She had a peace that didn't make sense. Her circumstances were not great, but she had hope. And as a young person, to see that, I had hope. And it was a gift. And so there's a peace that transcends understanding, but then there's a second step when it comes to this. And Paul says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, and if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Because let's be real, no one just stops worrying. We don't just wake up and decide, I am done worrying, I am gonna quit a bad habit and just be done. But instead, you have to trade it. You have to trade it for what you're currently dwelling on for something better and more beneficial. And did y'all know that we're psychologically predisposed to pay attention to bad news versus good news? Like, we set our sights on things that are hard, things that are bad, because it's in front of us all the time. It's marketable. It's on our phones, our TVs, our radios, our newspapers, our magazines. It's everywhere. And the reason it's so evident is because boring doesn't sell. Bad and tension-filled and drama-filled and chaotic, that sells, but boring doesn't sell. And so we are attentive to the negative things that are put in front of us. And so there was a book a couple years back, it was titled Factfulness. And the author, he has set out to help people understand the reality that we're being sold, and if it's true or if it's not true, and if it's not reality. And so I'm gonna walk through two of those this morning just to share some insight around this. And the first one has to do with extreme poverty. And so in the 1800s, it was said that 85% of the world was living in extreme poverty. And then in 1994, that decreases to 35% of people living in extreme poverty. And then we round out on the latest study, which was in 2022, and that was 8% of the world lives in extreme poverty. And 8% is still a number, and that is still something we're not okay with. But 85% to 8% is a huge jump. And looking at the world and what is presented to us, that doesn't necessarily feel like the case. And then the other one has to do with natural disasters. And in the early 1900s, there was 325,000 people who lost their lives from natural disasters. And then in the early 2000s, that number is 80,000% lost their lives. Again, that number's not okay. I'm not satisfied. You guys shouldn't be okay with that number. But when we look at our world, it's verifiably safer, richer, and it provides more opportunity than it ever has. But that's not always the reality that we are being sold, or that's not the things that we are dwelling on. And so the Apostle Paul said, take your thoughts captive. Shift your thinking to those things that are good, that are true, and that are right. And when you do, the peace of God will be with you. And some of you want to dismiss this because you don't have enough positive thinking in your mind to determine that you can go from negative to positive. You're like, I'm just not strong enough. I just can't get there. And some of you are like, I'm not a Jedi, I can't do this mind trick, it's not gonna work, good thought, but we're moving on. But it's not just that simple. Science has actually proven this as well. There's been 2 recent discoveries that have been made in neuroscience within the last 100 years that have proven this. And the first one is neuroplasticity. I'm not a scientist. I definitely didn't ace science in high school, but I did do some research about these 2 things to gain enough knowledge. And when I did, it gave me a little bit of hope. It gave me a little bit of peace when I think about where I'm going, how to take that captive, your thoughts. And so neuroplasticity in 1948, before 1948, it was thought that everything in our brain, everything in our mind was fixed. It could not be changed. What was there is what was there, and it was gonna stick like that. But then 1948 came along, and then there was a discovery that our brain matter is changing continuously. So it's no longer fixed. They discovered that things are constantly moving and changing and growing and are becoming moldable in our minds. And then there was this idea of neurogenesis. And what this meant is that it was discovered in 1998 that the brain generates daily brain cells every single day. Daily brain cells that are like these baby brain cells that are moldable. And so when they're moldable, that means that we get to determine what they turn out to be by the thoughts that we think in our mind. And so many times we think the primary change agent of our new moldable baby brain cells is our environment, is what we're seeing, is what we're eating, or the nutrients, or whatever we're bringing into our bodies. But really, those things do affect it. But the primary change agent is our thoughts. And so this is why this idea is so powerful, because your thoughts determine where you are going to be the next day, because we're constantly generating those new moldable brain cells. And so science verifies what the Apostle Paul told to a group of first century Christians in Rome in 56 AD. And this is what he told them. He said, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So do not let yourself be conformed to your environment, but be transformed by the things that you think. Because we're all engaged in a formation process every minute of every day. And this is not a religious thing. Science tells us it's a human thing. And so I want to take a moment to explain what I think Paul is telling us in the couple verses that we've looked at thus far. And so he says, do not be conformed by the pattern of this world. Because there's so much that comes from the world. There's anxiety, and there's fear, and there's politics, and there's things that we're wrestling with that leads us into this sense of anti-shalom. And by the end, and by the time we're conformed, we're divided, we're fractured, and we're pulled apart, and quite frankly, we're exhausted. He says, do not be conformed, but instead, entrust. So take that anti-shalom, take what is pulling you apart at your core, and I need you to entrust it to the King of Kings, to the Prince of Peace, the one who offered the gift of peace. And once you do, you get to trade it. And you get to trade it for the sense of shalom, that's something greater when it comes to peace, that brings wholeness and completeness and well-being. And when you trade your anti-shalom for a sense of shalom, then Jesus tells us that we are transformed. And so you go from someone who is broken and fractured, and you entrust to the Prince of Peace, who then allows you to trade it for a sense of completeness. And I just think that so often we get stuck in the constant whirlwind of, I'm just divided, I'm fractured, and I'm pulled apart. But there's an opportunity to entrust and trade and entrust and trade. So in a world where anxiety is at eye level, where fear is at eye level, I want to invite us to step back in to the fruit of peace. And so I had mentioned a little bit ago that I had that blood clot back in 2019, and in the midst of that, I spent 14 days in the hospital. I had 7 surgeries and a lot of other things that I would never like to have ever done again. And it was hard, and it was, quite frankly, annoying. But when we went to Cleveland Clinic, I remember sitting in the doctor's office, and he was in his chair, and he kind of looked at me with this face. I said, "What are you about to say right now?" And he said, "This was a close one." And I'm like, "A close one? What do you mean a close one?" And he said, "Well, a couple more hours and you could have lost your life." And I was taken aback by this, because no one had told me that. The 2 weeks I was in the hospital, that just was not part of the conversation. And so I was shocked, and my parents were shocked, and we kind of had to manage those thoughts and emotions. But we moved on. I moved on with my life. I continued as normal of what life looks like. But then about a year ago, I was living down in Kentucky doing student ministry for a couple years, and life was good. If you've moved to a new city, you know it's hard. It's not an easy thing. And there was a season that I stepped into where I felt like I was in a constant state of fight or flight when it came specifically to my health. And these feelings that I once had when I was in the hospital from my blood clot was now creeping back into my life. And anytime I felt something was wrong, or I felt like something was unsteady, or I didn't feel 100%, I felt like I had to run, I felt like I had to find help or find a solution right away because something was not right. And it got to the point where my professional life and my career, stress was heavier than it ever had been before, and relationships were hard, and people were frustrating, and I just had a lot on my shoulders. And then my personal life was also a hot mess, and I'll spare you the details of that, but it was just hard, and it left me feeling emotionally drained and, quite frankly, just exhausted. And all of this contributed to me and my feelings being triggered about my health. And this led to me laying down at night, and I couldn't fall asleep because I was so nervous that something was gonna go wrong and no one was gonna be there when something would go wrong, and so I just couldn't fall asleep. And then I would make doctor's appointments because I needed to sit in a doctor's office for him to look at me in the eyes and say, "You're a healthy 25-year-old. But I wouldn't believe it unless a professional told me that, because I was at such a state of unrest. And I got to the point where I truly just didn't know what to do next. And I would wake up in the morning and I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna handle today. I don't know how I'm gonna get to this evening. And I remember so distinctly driving to the dentist office, I believe, out of most random places. And I prayed a prayer that day while I was driving, and I said, God, I don't know how I'm gonna get through today. I don't think I have enough strength to get through today. So I'm gonna need you to do it for me. I'm gonna need you to get me through the next conversation, to get me through the next hour of work so I can at least be a little productive today. And that prayer that I prayed became a constant, not just daily, but moment by moment. I just was like, God, I need you right now, and I can't do it. And so this season was a season of entrusting and trading, and entrusting and trading, because my circumstances, they did not get better. But I entrusted and I traded, and in the midst of this, the peace of God, it began to guard my heart, and it began to guard my mind. And Jesus, the Prince of Peace, you see, he promised us this gift. And he said this in the book of John. He said, I am leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift that the world cannot give. Jesus said, you can't get my well-being, my completeness, and my wholeness from the world. But if you entrust to me what's dividing and what's fracturing in your life and pulling you apart, I will trade it for what's right, what's good, and what's true. And so the exchange is trading what is pulling at our sense of inner peace, leaving us in a sense of anti-shalom, and trading it for his sense of shalom. It restores us, and it puts us back together. And that's how we're led by the Spirit, and that's how we experience the fruit of peace in our lives. So what does our world need now? It needs the gift, and it needs you, and it needs me, and it needs us, but not the current version of us. It needs a more Christ-like version, a more peace-filled version. And that is what Christ-like looks, acts, and reacts like. And it's not just what our world needs now. It's what many of us need now. And so I'm not sure what you guys carried in this morning and what is pulling apart that inner peace, what is fracturing who you are at your core and causing division in your friends and your family, or just in your life in general. But here's the offer. We get the opportunity to entrust and trade the Prince of Peace for a sense of anti-shalom to a sense of shalom. And Jesus promised that to us. And so I hope that if that's something that you need right now, that you would take it. Let us pray. Dear Jesus, I just want to thank you for the ability to get a better understanding, a full circle view of what your peace is. And I pray that if somebody walked in the room today and they're just trying with everything they have to find a little bit of your peace, to trade the anti-shalom for shalom, that they would just open up their hands with their palms facing up as a posture to let go of what is holding them, what is conforming them to the world, and to just let that be released. To say out loud that we are entrusting what is holding us back, what is tearing us apart, and we are trading it for something better. Because Jesus, we know that is a promise that you have given us and that we get to partake in because the invitation is there. Let us have a peace that transcends understanding and hope in what is to come, even when our circumstances do not change. Thank you for your love. Thank you for the fruit of the Spirit and that we get to walk in that. In your precious name that we pray. Amen. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great week and we hope to see you next week. You are dismissed.